Hi everyone. Nice to see some faces popping up on the screen. My name is Imogen and I'm the host of this webinar today on household electrification for Australian councils, which we've been preparing in partnership with Renew. We have a lot of people who have expressed interest in this webinar, where over 350 people have registered. So we might just take a moment to let as many people in as we can to kick it off. So maybe just, I can't quite see how many. We've got 95 already in the room, which is great, but we might just give it a moment to see if we can get a few more. I'll just introduce myself. My name is Imogen and I've been working at Ironbark Sustainability for a few years and working in partnership with them for many more. I've been in the climate space for around about 20 years, working in education and with the Australian government around climate change science, communication, and with a number of advocacy groups as well. My role at Ironbark is to support the innovations unit, where we pull together interesting new pieces of data and provide resources to help the local government and community sector improve decision-making and efficacy around climate change actions. I'm really pleased to have so many people here today and so many wonderful speakers who I'll introduce shortly. And I'd also like to do an acknowledgement of country. I'm speaking on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We have guests visiting today from all across the country, and if you would like to put the name of your traditional owners into the chat, that would be great to see the diversity of people out there. I'd also really like to acknowledge that this point in time is a really critical one for First Nations people. We have a big decision as a nation coming up next weekend, and just really want to acknowledge the importance of that, and that Ironbark Sustainability supports a yes vote, and that we really acknowledge it adds a whole lot of extra challenges and stresses to First Nations communities being in this position at this point in time, and that we really, our heart goes out to them, and that we acknowledge whatever the outcome, that this is the first of many steps that need to be taken to improve outcomes for First Nations people. The next slide, thanks, Lex. The purpose of today is to really give an introduction. Well, it's actually not an introduction, it's to get into some of the nitty-gritty of household electrification. We have a whole host of amazing speakers who have expertise across a whole range of these different subjects. Dr. Rachel Goldust from Renew, Donna Lockman from Marybeck City Council, Damien Sullivan from the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, Amy Brand from Let Me Be Frank, Lisa Cliff from Better Futures Australia. Feel free to wave, everyone, so people know who you are. And Scott McHenry from the Eastern Alliance for Greenhouse Action. We've got a lot of speakers, so we're going to be passing the baton pretty swiftly between them. And a lot of topics to cover, from getting off gas, the toolkit that Renew have produced to support for lower income and vulnerable communities, communications, the nitty-gritty of apartments and townhouses, and then how do we advocate and support local government, state government and federal government working together on these issues, and then projects and implementation on the ground. Housekeeping, a few things. It's really lovely to have so many people here today, but that comes with a few challenges. One is that we are recording this webinar so that we can share it with you afterwards and pass it on to people who weren't able to attend. Please mute. We will do some questions, but it's unlikely we'll have time to go to you directly. We're likely to use the questions that people have put in beforehand, so muting would be great. But if you do have things you'd like to contribute, please use the chat function, and we have a few people on standby to respond to questions as we go. It would also be lovely to see your faces. I can see a number of you at the moment, but the more we have, the more interactive it is and the more pleasant it is for everyone who's both speaking and listening. So if you're able to show your face, that would be great. I'm back. Sustainability is a consultancy that works predominantly with local governments to support climate action at their council and community level. We now have about 50-ish staff and have been running programs for at least 250, 300 councils across the country. So we've been working really broadly, both at projects and at climate strategy level. And we're getting famous for Snapshot, which is a tool we've put together, which provides community emissions profiles for all local government areas, all federal electorate areas, states and nationally. And we are really grateful to be sponsored by a number of councils. So shout out to City of Mitcham's, Bayside City Council, City of Stonington and City of Kingston, and the City of West Torrens for supporting this tool, which is free and accessible for anyone to use. If anyone else would like to sponsor it, please get us in touch, because we are always looking for extra contributors. And then just briefly, one of the key pieces of work we've been doing lately is to pull the key emitters for each local government area to help inform better climate action. And we launched this product in May this year, where we had several hundred key emitters, data on several hundred key emitters across the country. We now have data on, I think, around 60,000 key emitting organisations across the country. So this is going in leaps and bounds around the opportunities for engaging with specific organisations in specific council areas to improve climate outcomes. About you, we have a lot of people. I can see at least 160 online. Most of you who registered come from Victoria, but we do have representation across the whole country. And we asked to pitch this. We wanted to understand your electrification journey, and it's pretty clear that most people in the audience have a pretty good understanding of the process already. So this webinar will be pitched to the higher end of the topic rather than the basics. There are so many questions around what councils are undertaking to assist household electrification, other things you'd like to hear from. We have prepared a little cheat sheet on this, and we will give it to you after the webinar, as long as you give us some feedback. So that's a little plug for you to let us know what you think of the webinar, and then you can have all that information at your fingertips. So on to our guests. Our first guest is Dr. Rachel Goldlust. We've been partnering with Renew to produce this event, and we are looking really to draw on the obstacles and the benefits for councils to engage in this process. Dr. Rachel Goldlust is the sustainability researcher at Renew, and she has enormous expertise in renewable energy, policy, and housing. She has developed the Getting Off Gas Toolkit, which we'll give to you also at the end of this webinar. Bringing together years of research with a passion for housing and education to improve our home's relationship with the broader environment. So Rachel, can you help us set the scene around why electrification is important and what households and councils can do to work together to make this happen? There's heaps of evidence supporting the case for electrification. So why should local governments get on board with helping households to do it?
Hi, yeah. Thanks, Imogen. Thanks, everyone, for having us. We're really excited about this event. So I guess it's not news to anyone that Australia's energy system is rapidly transitioning to renewables, and gas is proving to be more and more problematic within that mix. So the use for heating, hot water and cooking by households and in the non-industrial sector remains high and cannot easily be decarbonised. And as more and more reports are coming out weekly about the issues with gas in our homes and due to rising energy costs, choosing an all-electric home, including solar PV, means a new home buyer will be in the order of somewhere between $9,000 and $18,000 better off over the next 10 years as compared with establishing that home as a dual fuel home still running on gas. In terms of retrofitting, more efficient houses with good insulation, draft proofing and solar can cut bills by up to 80%, and those improvements will only increase as the prices for energy goes up. So local governments are at the coalface of these issues and at the transition because they deal with households every day. So they're the first to feel the communities struggle with rising electricity that are underperforming. Local governments can help their communities to be more resilient in the face of rising energy costs. They can help the houses to be healthier and happier for residents. And it's only with the help of local government in both a practical and as a lobby cohort that we can really start to shift the meter in terms of resilience, access, and affordability of electric appliances.
Thanks, Rachel. And how do we get in touch with this amazing Getting Off Gas toolkit?
So the toolkit was launched in July 2023, and it is gettingoffgastoolkit.com. And it consists of a set of practical independent resources for households to go through the stages of replacing their aging gas appliances with efficient electric appliances. It is aimed to be marketed towards a household at any point in their journey. So even if people are really new and thinking about the idea of where should they begin, there's chapters that will give people an idea from, the whys and hows, but also like, what is a whole of home assessment and how can I look at my energy as a whole system as opposed to just looking at it as simply appliances and energy inputs and outputs. So we tried to be as comprehensive, but also as accessible as possible so that people can find different ways in and then follow it along to the next step. So it could be your gas hot water services on the blink and it's time to replace that. So you're looking at what are your options there, or it could be I just want to figure out how to lower my energy bills. So how can I look at draft proofing and maybe thinking about insulation or segmenting the house to allow me to pay less?
Awesome. And if you're a council who's looking to support your household with this tool, how can they get in touch with you?
So we do have a council prospectus that will be distributed to everyone at this session, in which we're offering sort of targeted webinars that we can offer for your area, recognizing that every local government and every state has different situations and circumstances. So we're looking at providing sort of fact sheets and booklets that can be branded for council so that you can choose which parts of the electrification story are most relevant for your audience. And there can also be a targeted webinar that we can run for you so that your people in your local government area can ask questions that are pertinent to your area, recognizing that everyone has different circumstances and different needs, and even across the states that there are different considerations in terms of the position of gas in the mix of energy use.
Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. And just on that note, so nationally, about 23% of Australia's emissions come from the residential sector, but that is different in each state. So Victoria has the highest load with about 32% coming from the residential sector, and the Northern Territory having the least. So only 8% of emissions come from residential sector in the Northern Territory. So even across states, the incentives and the need for this kind of work can differ. We might move on now to Donna Luckman. Donna is a star in the household electrification space and has been working with at least 100 councils for quite a while on the communications and electrification journey. She's over 20 years experience in the sustainability sector, including as a CEO of Renew, or former CEO of Renew, sorry, I should say, the chair of the My Energy Marketplace Advisory Panel, and as the board member for the Coalition of Community Energy. So Donna, we've had a question in our pre-survey from Rebecca from the city of Stonington, who said they would really love advice on reaching communities. We all have very different communities with very different motivators, as Rachel said. So what's the best way to uncover these motivations and get the message to them?
Yeah. Thanks, Imogen. And yeah, thank you for the question as well. So we wanted to find answers to these questions as well. So about 2 years ago, we undertook market research with Essential Media, looking at some different households type, like people who are renting and looking to buy a home, people who are homeowners and others, and people looking to downgrade. Both did it from in an urban area, but some of the parts of Merribeck, but also we look at some of the growth areas as well out in suburbs. From that focus group, we sort of got 5 main findings about where people are thinking about moving off gas and go to electrification of their homes. The first one is that most participants see gas as an efficient, reliable, and cheap energy source for residential usage. So everyone has been sold on all those awesome gas television ads where you can have bubble baths and you can't actually do that any other way. People just see that gas is something that, will actually be good for their lifestyle. People didn't actually agree that electricity would be cheaper than gas. For them, it's really hard to be able to compare apples with oranges, and they still haven't been actually convinced that it'll be cheaper for you to actually move to an all-electric home. For most people, environmental impact is not top of mind when they're actually thinking about their gas bills. So most of the participants think that gas is going to play a significant role in the fuel mix for the long term. So they were thinking that, gas is going to be around for their lifetime. And the fifth area is that they didn't see electrification as like a, part of a modern sustainable home. Most people start thinking about solar and double glazing and other things. So we took those findings and also we then put a bit of a best practice lens on communications and behaviour change, and then came up with some messaging guide on how we're actually been doing our communications. So with all the communications that we're putting out to the community, we sort of have these different elements to it. One is to support them transition. So give people the pathway on what they need to do next. So I think, all the surveys out there saying there's lots of information out there, but get really clear on your call to action that you want to get people to do any communications that you do. Do celebrate renewables. Everybody loves solar power. Do celebrate that, be part of a clean, green renewable future is something people want to do. Be careful with your saving-based messaging. We actually find the best way that we've been able to get around that is actually to do case studies. So it's not me or someone actually telling you you're going to save better. It's actually Maria from Pascoe Vale talking about what happened in her house. That's actually going to have a bigger impact when we're talking about savings. Don't focus on the environmental benefit, which is sometimes a little bit hard for us in this sector, but actually really talk about, the benefits around health and how make it a bit more comfortable home and other elements like that. Then you can actually talk about carbon emissions as well, but we don't actually lead with that when we're doing our communications. I also talk about the event, electrification is the way to go. I sometimes feel like I'm Electrolux ad, like go to the future of electrification. That's where we need to go. That sort of messaging really works for people about sort of keeping up with the Joneses and what other people are doing in their community. Sort of what I said before as well, really talk on the health benefits and the safety benefits of actually moving to electric appliances. And the one that we tell people, and it's sort of a bit, hard, is don't fight gas. Don't actually say, electricity is better than gas because people don't actually listen then to what you actually said. Try not to spend all your time negating some of the gas elements, but just talk about all the benefits that it's actually for consumers on how they can actually do their, where they want to go with electrification. So we've actually packaged all that up into a messaging guide that you can find on our Merribeck website. So I'll put in the chat a link to that actual communications guide. And then, there's lots of examples on our website of some of the different other communications work that we do. But as Imogen said, we've actually got a community of practice that spends a lot of time talking about different communications messaging that we do on electrification. And I know a lot of people are on the chat today, and I might encourage some of them to actually put links to their websites as well, and just to share around some of the other communications that some of the different councils around the country have been doing as well.
Thanks, Donna. I'm going to give you one more question, but real quick response. It's from Jenny in Wagga Wagga with a slightly different take around communications. So rather than communicating with the household, how do you communicate internally with staff and councillors to make decisions to support this kind of work? And why should council be doing the work of it when I think the question was like, what do you say when supporting electrification will send the council broke?
Yeah, I think it's a bit, you have to use some of the similar things that we did with the households. It's like, it's the future proofing. This is where we actually need to do for some of the future proofing. It's having some of those one-on-one discussions. So we actually use some of the, things that we work for the households, we find for some of the internal work as well. And also, it's a ongoing discussion that we have to keep on doing with all the different elements of our council. So working with councillors, working with staff, especially our capital work staff as well, just to make sure that they're comfortable about the future directions that we're going in with some of our projects, but also then sharing what some of the other councils have done as well. So I think there's some really great examples like Brimback City Council and their all electric swimming pool, like more of those case studies that we can keep sharing with each other. I think it makes it much easier.
Beautiful. Thanks, Donna. We're going to move right on to Damien Sullivan. Damien is the Principal of Policy and Research at the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence and has been working for a long time on climate change and energy work. He's really experienced in innovative pilots across energy affordability and efficiency, with a focus on social impacts. He's really passionate about working with communities facing disadvantage. They often have the most to gain from the transition to a low carbon economy. So how can we support them better? So Damien, there were dozens of responses in our survey about how to best support and work with low income households and vulnerable communities. How do you think council can best support them?
Thanks, Imogen. It's great to be here today. We did a recent piece of work with the University of Melbourne and the Life Course Centre called Enabling Electrification, looking at the barriers and enablers for low-income households to, and those people facing financial stress to electrify. And in that piece of work, we surveyed 220 low-income households we had worked with in the past, many of whom were facing high levels of energy stress, and undertook 7 focus groups, and including one with members of the Burmese community. And some of the takeaways from that research were, we were a little surprised to find a high level of support for the transition away from gas, with 69% of those people surveyed supporting the transition. However, very few had taken action, only about 10%. And I think councils can play a critical role in assisting these low-income people and those facing financial stress to transition. One of the things in that research we identified was the diversity in this low-income group. And we separated it into those people with an interest in electrification and those without an interest, and those with the capacity to act because they have the financial capacity or because they have the control over their homes. And I think the responses we take depend on which of those groups we're talking about. So just to go to one, the warmest group, if you like, the people with an interest in electrification and the capacity to act. I think here, providing council has a really important role into providing trusted information, pointing people to information like that from Renew and others. People said that they really did trust council as a channel. They didn't trust their tradies so much, or even Bunnings were a bit surprised by. So councils have this really critical role. Things like why reverse cycle air conditioning is good for heating, and about heat pumps, people don't know a lot about it. We really saw the lack of information and a lack of trust as a barrier. So, for example, one of the participants said, as a woman on the pension, I can't afford to get it wrong. So I really want to know that the changes I'm making are the correct ones. So that's the first one around information, sharing that information. The other one is leveraging the funding that's already out there in different states and territories, because we found a low level of awareness amongst this group in terms of the rebates and programs from state governments and federal governments. So making sure your communities are informed about what's out there is really important, I think, as well. And council, again, can play a key role in that, both through the traditional channels like the communications materials put out by the council, but also by getting into those different areas through community groups that you work with, through your age and disability teams and the like as well.
So we've had a question specifically around CALD communities, so communities that don't speak English as a first language. you mentioned the Burmese community as well. Are there specific lessons around how we can support those communities?
Yeah, look, I think what we heard from the Burmese speaking community was, for example, one of the households who had put solar on their roof, they had put solar on the roof in large part because they could work with a Burmese speaking installer and somebody they had trust in through the community. So councils connecting up with the community groups in your community that are already active is a useful thing to do. Talking to those community groups about their views on electrification and gas as well, and helping them to getting them involved in the co-design of programs is very important. In our work, we've had staff who work in community language at different times, making sure materials translated as well. I think those things are all very important.
Thanks heaps, Damien. That's really good to know. We're going to move on now to Amy Brand from Let Me Be Frank. Amy heads up the strategy and culture at this org, and she co-creates the strategy, culture and action with businesses, communities and governments who are looking for a just future for people and for the planet. Over the course of 10 years, Amy has been involved in a range of projects exploring sustainability and resilience, particularly in the strata communities. So apartments are a tricky component of this piece of work. Amy, what can councils do to support apartments?
Thanks, Imogen. So I was asked to speak a little bit about challenges and solutions in the apartment space, and specifically I'm looking at retrofitting. We know there's a huge, new buildings are one thing, but retrofitting the buildings that already exist is a huge thing as well. I could talk all day about challenges and solutions in this space, so I'm just going to pick out four of each to get us started and get us thinking, but just want to frame the conversation around some overarching complexity. So if we're talking about apartments and townhouse communities, just to remember, we're talking about both private spaces in the apartments as well as commonly owned spaces and infrastructure. We're talking about an ecosystem of people that are on-site and off-site, communities that operate under state-based legislation, so under Owners Corporation Acts, and we're talking about a need for technological solutions at the individual household scale and in larger buildings at technology solutions that are more at a commercial scale. So yes, it's complex, but I guarantee you there are opportunities. But just going back to look at a few challenges first, the biggest and most overarching one that I see is beyond electrification, and it's a more general barrier that in Australia there's a real general lack of understanding about how strata works from a maintenance and governance perspective. So this is across people who actually own in these buildings, it's across renters, but it's also across large sectors of government and the sustainability sector. And so if we can't understand the system in which we're working, it's really hard to then change and drive that electrification journey. So I think there's a big education piece. Important to remember that decisions about common area infrastructure always require some level of collective decision making, and we've all experienced how challenging collective decision making can be. And even making change inside apartments can interact with that collective decision making. So if everyone in the building changes their apartments from gas cooking and heating, can the electrical load of the whole building cope? There may need to be some discussion around that. Also important to remember, electrification work and retrofitting work in general is usually driven by the Owners Corporation Committee or by one committed individual. These are essentially volunteers who may or may not have the skills required to do the work, and volunteer burnout is a really big issue in these communities. And lastly, we do have a shortage of examples of apartment buildings that have transitioned from gas to all electric, and we all know the power of social norming. So if you know there's a building in your community that's gone through this transition, maybe drop it into the chat, because I think that will be really helpful for people. So yes, it's complicated, but the flip side, I think there's so much potential in this sector. So I'm going to talk about 4 things I reckon we can jump in and do to start this change. So firstly, apartment and townhouse communities need tailored support and information that fits their unique context. We need much more of this, but there is already information that exists and that you can share today with your community. So we just saw the Renew Guide, which has a section on apartments. And there's also a chunky guide that in a previous role, thanks to funding from Mary Beck and from Yarra, I worked with a bunch of savvy folks to develop a guide for electrification in apartment communities. Granted, there's still a huge amount to test and learn in this space, but the guides do provide direction and consideration for both common areas and private apartments. So it's a really good starting point.
Awesome. You got more, Amy?
I've got 3 more and I'll be really quick.
Very good.
We need to fund electrification pilots and lobby other levels of government to fund these pilots. Bring your apartment communities together for peer-to-peer support. They will help each other find the solutions if you bring people together across buildings. And lastly, experiment. So share outcomes. When you work in these communities, share outcomes with other councils. There's latent opportunities in these communities. And thinking at that whole of building scale, someone mentioned renters before, and how do we deal with renters? If you think about working with an apartment community, you are working with landlords, you're working with owner occupiers, you're working with renters, and you get that peer pressure to actually do the retrofit. So councils are great at bulk buys. Can you run a bulk buy on a building-based level to really social norm on a hyper-local scale? Back to you, Imogen.
That's awesome, Amy. It's great to hear the kind of mention around how this sort of fits in the remit of state government, but local governments have a really critical role to pull out the case studies and the solutions that state government or strata or others can then implement. We're going to move on now to Lisa. Lisa Cliff is from Better Futures Australia. She's a climate change policy advocate driven to scale practical, cost-effective and lasting solutions to climate change. She leads the Better Futures Australia program, which works with a broad range of organisations, businesses, subnational governments to collectively drive an ambitious climate change response and influence the domestic and international climate change policy agenda. So Lisa, great to talk to you around multi-level governance and how we can understand things like the current federal government's funding and commitments to the Household Energy Upgrades Fund and what councils can do to get involved for better outcomes for these funding decisions.
Yeah, thanks, Imogen. It's great to be here, and I'm very lucky to be in a position to work with experts like yourself in finding solutions to this wicked problem. So I'm joining you all from Yagara and Turrbal People's Country in Mianjin, and yeah, just a tiny bit of background before I share more on how councils can play a role in advocating and implementing key pieces like the Household Energy Upgrades Fund. So for those of you, I'm sure many of you know in detail and have been engaging in what the fund is, but it's part of the Albanese government's energy savings package, federal budget commitment of 1.3 billion, overseen by the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. The fund is partnering with banks and other lenders to provide more financing options that households can invest into upgrading their homes. So a lot of the key things Dr. Rachel Goldlast was sharing with us about batteries, solar, appliances, and other household improvements to basically help our communities increase their climate resilience and energy efficiency, and do that significant piece of decarbonising the built environment sector to meet Australia's climate and energy commitments. So in terms of ways councils can get involved, we also heard from others, Donna and others, on the key role that councils can play in amplifying the reach and impact of energy initiatives like this fund. So councils also have a deep and greater understanding of the local needs, and it's important that councils therefore help with the design and implementation to make sure that the range of financing options and policies and settings are accessible and tailored to meeting the community's needs, like Damien was sharing, with how we can ensure that it's accessible and helps the most vulnerable in our communities. So with the Better Futures Australia Local Government Working Group that involves a lot of the local government climate initiatives and networks and alliances, our recent meetings with the Assistant Minister and the Clean Energy Finance Corporation also highlighted the important role of councils engaging with the federal policymakers throughout the design and implementation of these initiatives to help the federal government and the CEFC navigate the web of existing local and regional providers and installers and other programs in place. And also, as Donna was sharing, to learn from existing case studies to see where things are working well on the ground. So I'm not sure, Imogen, if you wanted me to also speak just a little bit to the role of councils in federal advocacy, but yeah, Damien shared some great advice on the key role that local governments can play in making sure that federal initiatives like the Household Energy Upgrades Fund are accessible and that the most vulnerable in communities can benefit from it. So I think it's important to draw on the case studies and the successful examples like the Victorian Healthy Homes programs. And also really it highlights the essential role that local councils and cities can play in being those trusted communicators and translators to those key stakeholders. So the other important piece that I wanted to highlight is around the multi-level governance advocacy piece. So the Household Energy Upgrades Fund is targeting around 170,000 Australian homes, including some 60,000 odd social housing properties. So in terms of the amount of work we have ahead to help the entire country, all of the economy and society deliver on our fair share of the Paris Climate Agreement and get onto that 1.5 degree trajectory, we need to do a lot more in terms of upgrading the energy efficiency of around 11 million more homes across the country. So to do that, we really need councils to have that united collective voice to call for the policy settings and the longer term investment settings that are needed to do that work ahead. So including councils and cities in the federal national cabinet meetings, the climate and energy ministerial meetings is a great step through ALGA. But I think there's a lot more that we can be doing as a sector. So the Better Futures Australia Local Government Working Group is a really positive collaborative space, and it brings together a lot of really great initiatives across the country that are developing shared key policy recommendations and also working to provide a platform like this one for bringing together broad, unique advocates to share diverse stories of what climate action and the energy transition means for their context. So part of this, as Imogen mentioned, involves what we can do to champion and advocate for a multi-level governance framework. So local climate action, we know, is stunted and there's a lot of obstacles to delivering on the ground through a lack of coordinated state and federal climate policies, and also the federal initiatives like I'm sure many of you have come across obstacles through the National Construction Code. So we need greater integration of climate policies across all levels of government and a more comprehensive and sustainable longer term strategy that will ensure we can all work constructively together to decarbonise the economy. And I'd like to direct you all to the amazing recently published report, The Many Hands Make Light Work, by our friends with the Cities Power Partnership and the Melbourne Centre for Cities. And it really provides a clear example of how a multi-level governance framework can help us decarbonise through the built environment sector.
Thanks so much.
And yeah.
We might cut you off there because we're running out of time, but I think we've got several hundred councils and communities who are interested in this space on this call, and I think collectively we're a pretty powerful voice. So we will be doing some work in the background to provide some further recommendations and advice both to state and federal governments. So if you've got anything you'd like to chip into that recommendation, please get in touch with us and we'll pass it on. I'm now going to move on to Scott McHenry from the Eastern Alliance for Greenhouse Action, who will give us some practical implementations around on-the-ground procurement and implementation that councils can deliver. Scott has been the executive officer of the Alliance since its inception over 10 years ago. He's delivered many high-profile and innovative mitigation and adaptation projects extending beyond the Alliance's 8 member councils to include the whole of local government sector with significant impacts across the state. So Scott, you and your fellow Greenhouse Alliance leaders have been involved in lots of successful projects on the ground, regarding household energy efficiency and electrification. So what kind of interventions should councils be looking at to unlock this potential in both new builds and existing dwellings?
Thanks, Imogen, and hello everyone. I'm joining you from Wurundjeri land, where the 8 member councils of EAGA are based. For context, we've recently done some zero net analysis work with Ironbark and looked at all the sort of lowest cost emission reduction opportunities across the region. Household electrification comes up as the second largest of 26 different opportunities we modelled. And it's the 11th cheapest as well. And we've already mentioned some of the cost benefits previously in this session. We also looked at all the council interventions that could be delivered to try and unlock those abatement opportunities. And in terms of the residential electrification piece, it comes down to 2 main approaches. One around new builds, and that specifically relates to planning. The gap here for council is generally around capability and capacity. So there's some opportunity there to potentially share resources to make sure that we're actually achieving best practice. And then there's also an advocacy piece to be done around planning to actually improve the framework, the laws, the regulations to enable to ensure we can enable that low carbon resilient buildings that we need. Beyond the new builds, we've got the existing dwellings, and this is really about programs. So we think councils have a real niche role around the education piece, and we've got programs that are being out there delivered at the moment, such as subsidised energy home assessments or goodbye gas electrification assessments. Many of these have been oversubscribed. Beyond the education, you've got the more concierge, complicated type programs like solar savers that support that theory of change that Donna mentioned, where you're providing information, but you're actually providing that pathway for people to actually change behaviour or do something different. So many of you have probably heard about solar savers. It's quite a well-established program that's administered here in EAGA on behalf of now 13 participating councils. It's really sort of got 3 parts to it. So we've got an open bulk buy that's available to anybody. We help councils administer some subsidies if they want to dip into their own pocket and try and overcome those upfront cost barriers for low income or vulnerable households. So that would be in addition to the state government subsidies. And we also do rates programs where councils might want to fund the entire upfront cost of the upgrade and recoup the money over time through a property charge or something similar. We have a suitably experienced and well qualified installer that works with the program. They are appointed through a quite rigorous procurement and tendering process. So this really does 3 things for the council. It helps them manage risks for, a dodgy installer. And that's one of the first things that councils always ask when they join the program, or they say, tell me this is not going to be one of those pink bats type schemes. So we really want that kind of sort of detailed, strong contract that manages what are really, small businesses that do have their limitations. That tendering procurement process also is intended to deliver economies of scale and drive down costs. But it also is about vetting the installers, and this also helps the householder make a decision. So we make it easier because we've gone through the process of already looking at their business, their warranties, their products, and we can point to an installer and say this is a good provider, and that's another big thing around addressing the trust issue. So it's a shared services model. We've got staff based here with Maroondah that administer the program on behalf of contractors. And we think that type of approach saves councils quite a lot of money from running it in-house. And we think it's in the order of around $30,000 per council if they're going to put their own staff on or get an alternative third party to administer it on their behalf. And we're currently looking to expand the offering at the moment into high efficiency aircon systems and hot water heat pumps to deliver the broader sort of electrification of ambitions of council. So yeah, I might draw it there because I know the clock is running, and throw it back to you, Imogen.
Thanks, Steve. Scott. I'm going to give you one more question around vulnerable communities. And I know I've seen some news articles recently around Geelong Sustainability and a network of councils in that region also working to provide climate safe rooms for vulnerable people. Can you talk a little bit about how the Solar Savers program helps support low income and vulnerable households too?
Yes, so we do a lot of outreach and run information sessions. And recently we did one with the city of Casey and we used Auslan interpreters. So that's the official language for the deaf community in Australia. So what we did was engage a specialist to review the materials and content in advance to make sure that they were inclusive and simple. And that's because the language and translation aspect is quite tricky with terms like inverters, etc. And many of the attendees, because they've had impairments, they're less well educated. So simplicity is really, really key. We relied on 2 interpreters and 12 of the 19 attendees did have hearing impairments. There were trust issues that had to be overcome. Some of them had problematic existing installations that needed to be addressed. And we had the benefit of having a great installer work with us and actually go out on site and sit down and speak with these people and understand what had gone wrong. We think these types of sessions are probably done better in person than on screen. And that's because some members need to lip read and look at multiple people. So that might be a challenge. So definitely probably in person. It was promoted as a normal session and the costs were like $115 per person per hour with a minimum of 2 hours. So it's something we could be keen to replicate again.
Awesome. So that's a wrap from our speakers. We've had hundreds of questions come through the survey and I can't see the chat, but I expect there's some more in there. But we're going to go just to a few that were sent through earlier. I'm going to start with one around councils providing financial incentives to help residents electrify their homes. It looks like around 30 councils who are attending today are providing some kind of grant or rebate. So I'm going to ask, I might start with Donna around what are the best examples of do's and don'ts around councils specifically providing grants and rebates to support this work.
Yeah, so we at Marybeck, we have rebates for people on low income, more for solar and also for thermal efficiency upgrades, mostly just insulation and draft proofing. So I think it's a bit what Damien and others have talked about before, like, the unique opportunity of local government is that we can be that concierge service. So we can go through the procurement process, get really good suppliers, step people through the different processes to actually get the installation done, and also reach people in ways that other programs won't. Like, for example, for us, the best way to reach some of our people is just a letter from the mayor. Like, we look at the rates, who's on getting, claiming, the low income already. How can we actually get to them right and directly? And I must say, we spend a lot of time doing comms online, but the thing of the letters in people's letter boxes, it actually works really well for a large part of our community.
Awesome. So one more question around trades, and both how to influence trades to support this electrification process, and how can they take up, how can the skills shortage in the trades be addressed by councils to support uptake of electrifying everything? And I might give that one to Rachel.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's one that is, we've heard so often from local governments and from people across the various industries that is going to be a serious problem if everyone is pushing towards electrification and there is a serious barrier at the skills level. And it's something that Renew would really like to be pushing forwards in terms of developing educational resources and actually reaching specifically into those networks and saying, what do you need and how can we tailor some of the information that we've developed for residents more towards industry and business in a way that is accessible, in a format that can be, if it's a podcast, can be listened to, or if it's in, visuals, or, just some way that we can, and we would really like to work with local governments on that project in order to, best deliver educational resources to trades that would be the right kind of resources. We accept that not everyone has the time and the capacity to use the Getting Off Gas Toolkit website, and it's also not necessarily delivered in the right way for, those kind of audiences. So yeah, it's definitely something that we would really like to push forward with.
Awesome. I'm going to move us on now to the one thing that these experts would recommend that you as council or community people would undertake. We're going to keep this really short and sharp so that we can wrap up right on 12 o'clock and let you guys get some lunch. So one actionable thing. Rachel, kick us off.
Yeah, so our actionable item would be to really communicate with those in your local government area about, how they would like this kind of information to be delivered, because that is critical. As Donna has said, the messaging is really important, but it is also in the packaging of how people want this information. So whether it is online or in webinars or in, mail outs, like Donna said, those are sort of questions that we would really value, and something that's really practical and tangible that you can ask your community.
Number 2, Donna, what would you ask these wonderful people to engage in?
If you're not already, join our Electrify Everything Communications Committee of Practice. So we meet monthly for 1 hour, the first Wednesday of the month. We've got a Basecamp group that has a whole lot of resources on there. We've actually made a whole lot of the communications materials. We've developed Creative Commons. There's example action plans. A whole lot of Sydney councils put together and actually turn their action plans into lots of different languages. So come on board and join all the other resources that councils are doing.
Beautiful. Damien, what would you recommend?
If you haven't already, put a lens on your work around ensuring no one is left behind across program, policy and advocacy in 100% electric homes. And that includes people with a disability, those from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, people facing financial stress. We've heard lots of great ideas today about how to do that, including advocacy, and that's really important as part of it.
Amy, what's your one thing?
So I would say share the guides that have been produced, and just a note on the electrification guide for apartments. It was produced under Creative Commons, so you can reskin it in your brand. If your council needs things to go out with your branding, you can absolutely do that. There's no charge. And then get people together. Peer-to-peer support is so critical. Don't wait as a council until you have all the answers and know everything about strata. Put out some guides, get people together, and they will talk and they will solve some of the problems themselves.
Lisa, what's your one thing?
Yeah, thanks, Imogen. It's really just to actively engage with federal policymakers to make sure we bring local perspectives to the table in the design and implementation of key pieces like the Household Electrification Fund, and then the broader piece as highlighted by the Many Hands Make Light Work report, to really make sure we continue having a united voice and clear, consistent ask for the settings we need for that longer term rollout of action.
I think a clear subtext to this webinar today is that the greater the role that local governments and communities can play in advocating for better solutions, the better. Scott, one more thing.
Yeah, it's really don't recreate the wheel. So join an existing program or copy and paste another one, but at the same time, really please do go hard on that advocacy stuff, because our work showed that councils can probably unlock 7 to 15% of that total abatement in our region. So all the sectors of the economy do have a role to play, and so yeah, it's really important that we're helping them get there and advocating to those other sectors too.
That is awesome. I think the collective knowledge of these experts that we've put in front of you today really shows that there is so much to do. There's so much that's really ready for action right at this minute. The opportunities for households to both improve on their savings, their health, their outcomes, and the comfort in their home is extraordinary. The federal and state governments are ready to support these actions. We just have to give them the right advice and implementation around how this can work at that local level, and really importantly, to bring those who are least capable of making these decisions for themselves along for the ride. Really like to acknowledge the time and effort of the speakers today. We really appreciate your input. It's really extraordinary to be able to pull this amount of material together for the audience. And again, thank you to the people who've turned up today. It really exceeded our expectations around the number of people who are interested in this topic. So really grateful. I think it clocked at 190 was the top that I saw it. So really grateful to all of you for attending and being willing to champion this in your own communities. And hopefully we can pull it together and provide more support and more resources for this work over the coming years, because it's really important. We have a feedback form, which we would like to give you, because your input really helps to shape how we produce these information sessions. And we also have lots more information to give you. So if you fill out that form, you will not only get all of the information that the speakers have suggested that you take a look at today, you will also get a look at what other councils have said that they are doing. And again, that peer-to-peer support and encouragement is really important. So having a look at what other actions councils are taking can really help give you the evidence and support to take action at your own level as well. So please fill in that form. You'll get the Electrify Everything communications tool. You'll get the information around the sustainable strata, about enabling electrification for low-income households, the Getting Off Gas toolkit, and more. So please do get in touch. And also in that feedback form, if you do have suggestions that we can take either to state or federal parliamentarians around better policy and better advice, please do put them in there, because we are hosting an additional workshop with that specific intention in mind around getting that advice to those decision makers in the next few weeks. There are also a whole lot of policy submissions that people can jump on board to if they like, or we can help coordinate collective responses to those. For example, the future of gas in Australia kind of work as well. So there are many opportunities to provide advice and recommendations back to those higher level decision makers. I think we can wrap it there. It's an absolute pleasure to have you all here today. We love to see your faces. We love to hear your thoughts. We love to get your questions and provide you with a little bit of advice. Maybe we can take a moment to thank all our speakers. Double thumbs up, I like it. Thanks very much, everyone. We'll let you know what our next webinar is quite shortly.
Thank you.